Policy Association. Topic number 7 is the Islamic Republic of Iran, a perennial foreign policy challenge for the U.S. government. The topic is subtitled At a Crossroads because Iran today faces 2, if not 3, distinct futures. This is not the first time that Iran has been in such a position. Back in 1946, shortly after the end of the Second World War, the Iranian crisis was placed on the agenda of the UN Security Council, its first topic of consideration. The Soviet Union was placing enormous pressure on Iran to align with Moscow, and if not, it was encouraging the northern portion of the country to break away and proclaim independence. In 1953, the Iranians had 2 distinct paths to consider. One was democracy, though socialist, under a newly elected prime minister, and the other was to align more closely with the Western nations. In 1979, the gravest of all crossroads decisions was made. Early on in that revolution, it appeared that moderates would prevail, pushing Iran away from the dictatorship of the Shah and towards a Western socialist model. In the end, however, radicals took charge. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. In 2023, Iran has no fewer than 3 paths moving forward. The first, and perhaps most likely, is that of the status quo, where the Islamic Republic remains, the Ayatollah stays in power, and the country is at odds with most Western powers. It could elevate its status in terms of power by acquiring usable nuclear weapons, or, as many hope, there could be a wholesale reorientation to the West through yet another revolution. Many point to a Shia spring underway in places like Lebanon and Iran as evidence that this new path may be taken. Iran's geostrategic location places it between hostile powers. The Saudi Arabians are on the other side of the Persian Gulf, long borders with Pakistan, Afghanistan to the east, and Iraq to the west. The United States has been deeply engaged in the Persian Gulf and Middle Eastern region since the Second World War. We've engaged our allies and our adversaries, fought a global war on terrorism that centered on this region, 2 wars with Iraq, one very brief and successful in 1991, and the other very long and painful that started in 2003. Israel, access to oil, and nuclear proliferation round out America's concerns and engagement in the Persian Gulf region. With each of these topics, Iran has played prominently. This is a country that is incredibly important to the United States, yet one with which we've had very little dialogue for sustained periods of time. That was not the case before 1979. The Shah was an American ally. His toppling led to the Islamic Republic, the taking of Western hostages, and deep-seated hatred between the 2 nations. Dialogue simply disappeared for decades on end. We re-engaged the Iranians under the Obama administration through the nuclear arms negotiations that ended with the arrival of Mr. Trump in the White House, the canceling of the deal, and the application of a max pressure campaign on the Iranians. The Biden administration has restarted nuclear arms talks. They've been rather limited in their scope, and there does not appear to be a smooth path forward for them. The key foreign policy questions we should ask relating to Iran: should we re-engage with the country? Is there any opportunity to find common ground? Can the nuclear arms deal be reestablished? Will Iran go nuclear with or without a negotiated deal? And finally, is Iran really at another crossroads? Are we simply being optimistic? There are 3 main considerations for us before we consider U.S. foreign policy options. We'll look at how we lost Iran as an ally, the rise of the Islamic Republic after 2000 in particular, and Iran at a crossroads today. We begin with the old Iran, Post-World War II, the United States had several goals as we looked to the Middle East. One of the most important was access to oil, the lifeblood of industrial societies and the Western world. We also wanted to contain the Soviet Union, to keep communism at bay, and finally to counter terrorism. There were several allies in the region that were considered absolutely essential to the successful completion of our mission. One was Turkey, an ally after World War II and a member of NATO beginning in 1952. In 1967, Israel became one of our closest allies, and in between the two, beginning in 1953, especially, Iran was central to our foreign policy in the region. All three allies, pillars of U.S. foreign policy. We won Iran, if you will, in 1953. It was the aftermath of a national election when Mohammad Mossadegh was elected, a leftist who threatened to nationalize oil fields. The Western powers and the Seven Sisters, the major oil companies, had dominated oil production from ground to market. Many in the Middle East believed that the people of the countries should benefit from the oil found underneath their soil. Concerned by the possibility of losing its access to Iranian oil, the United Kingdom led an international boycott of oil from Iran. There was much talk of an invasion from either the United States or the United Kingdom. We ultimately decided to use the CIA in order to create a street demonstration that propelled a new ally to power in the form of the Shah. Here we see Mohammad Reza Shah, a pro-Western Iranian leader who sought to industrialize and modernize Iran, at the same time brutally repressing his people. The demonstrations that began in 1978 against the Shah were largely driven by young moderates seeking to be more like Western Europe, socialist, democratic, and more liberal. It was not long, however, before radical religious elements took over the Iranian Revolution, driving home the Islamic Republic and welcoming the return from Paris of the Ayatollah himself, who became the spiritual leader of the new Islamic Republic of Iran. Hatred for Israel, the West, and the United States was endemic in Iran thereafter. Here we see images of Western hostages that were taken, held captive for 444 days, dooming the presidency of Jimmy Carter. The decision to move away from moderation towards radicalism, one of the more important revolutions of the 20th century. The societal hatred is reflected in murals such as this. The Iranians detest the Americans, they do not trust us, and we return the very same feelings towards them. So what has happened in Iran since the revolution? We can chart the power level of Iran dating back some 50 years, a full decade before the Iranian Revolution. I would plot Iran's power level over that time along these lines, dividing the chart into 4 distinct time periods. There was the slow decline of Iran under the Shah, the devastating 8-year war with Iraq, which began in 1980, pushing Iran to its lowest power level. Following that conflict, for about a decade, Iran was boxed in. And then we see the power surge that began around 2001, which is largely attributable, in my opinion, to flawed American policy towards the region. This was the time of the greatest success of U.S. foreign policy. It's genuinely unfortunate that Iran managed to escape the box and rise in power. What exactly caused Iran's power to rise? An improved geostrategic position, a nuclear weapons program that nearly reached the point of viability, and finally splintered opposition powers. The geostrategic location of a country is defined as its location relative to other powers. Is it surrounded by hostile, large, and capable countries, or are they distant from the borders? For Iran, there were nothing but adversaries when the Iran-Iraq War ended. America's military might was all around the country. A NATO ally in Turkey in the upper left-hand corner, significant American naval positions just outside the Persian Gulf, and then American troop positions in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Adding to Iran's geostrategic troubles was an Iraq still led by Saddam Hussein, the same individual who invaded the country a decade earlier. And to the east, there is Afghanistan under the Taliban with the influence of Osama bin Laden, an adversary of the Islamic Republic. As you can see, 30 years ago, Iran was completely boxed in, diminished in power. Everything changed after 2001. The United States went to war in Afghanistan in response to the 9/11 terror attacks in New York and Pennsylvania. In so doing, we toppled a government, the Taliban, and chased bin Laden, a terrorist, who were adversaries of Iran. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, another adversary of Iran, weakening the Western Front. As a result of these two interventions, Iran was no longer hemmed in, it was effectively out of the box because of its changed geostrategic position. Conflicts related to the Arab Spring in places like Syria, Egypt, Yemen, among others, further gave Iran opportunities for influencing affairs in neighboring countries. Here we can see a graph of the Arab Spring, the revolt across North Africa and the Arab world that undermined their solidity and empowered the Iranian government. Next, as a driver of Iran's power rise, its nuclear weapons program. As you can see from this graph, we're not talking about Iraq in the 1980s, which had a single reactor. The Iranian nuclear program is spread out throughout the country. It is hidden and protected in mountain ranges and very difficult to get at. The question is, why does a nation in general, Iran in particular, pursue nuclear weapons capabilities? Historically speaking, there are many reasons, the most obvious of which is sheer power. Having a nuclear device greatly increases a country's military capabilities. Next is military deterrence. This prevents a nation from invading you if you've got the capability of devastating them with a nuclear strike. Keep in mind that George W. Bush talked about an axis of evil in the world. This is shortly after the 9/11 attacks. He listed Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as members of that axis of evil. Countries that could not be reformed from within could only be changed from without, meaning a U.S. invasion. The U.S. invaded Iraq. Iraq, of course, had no nuclear deterrence. It did not invade North Korea, which had nuclear weapons, beginning in 2006. The message to Iran was clear. If you've got nuclear weapons, you may be safer from a U.S. invasion. Nations, such as the United States in 1945, developed nuclear capabilities for offensive purposes to end a world war. There's also the lure of status. Only 9 countries today have nuclear weapons, and that means that if you possess them, you show a scientific prowess that few others possess. And finally, one could pursue nuclear weapons as bargaining leverage, to have something to bring to the table in order to negotiate a better relationship moving forward. In 2012, more than a decade ago, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went before the General Assembly and said that Iran was within 90 to 180 days of breakout, meaning it was very close to possessing nuclear weapons, that economic sanctions had fundamentally failed, and a more robust policy needed to be taken to address the issue of Iran's nuclear weapons program. The problem back then and today is there are very few good options for dealing with an Iranian nuclear weapons program. We can economically sanction the country, and we've done so for more than a generation. This graph shows us the effectiveness or lack thereof of economic sanctions in dealing with Iran's nuclear program. The red bar represents nuclear weapons capability, and the line that you see there is the progress in that direction. Significant sanctions were applied by the United States beginning in 2000, along with our allies, to prevent Iran from developing nuclear capabilities, yet throughout that decade, the number of Iranian centrifuges and overall progress continued to increase. The deal was struck in 2014, progress was diminished, the deal was withdrawn from by the U.S., maximum sanctions were applied, and Iran today is closer than ever to nuclear weapons capability. This tells us that sanctions alone simply will not prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. Our second option is to assassinate scientists, which we, along with the Israelis and other allies, have done for the last couple of decades. This indeed does slow down Iran's progress, but it by no means ends it. War is an option that many people support. I guess the first question is, who's going to wage it? Certainly not the Israelis. They don't have a military designed for long-range sustained combat. Iran is simply too far, the battle is too complex, the targets are too greatly protected, and the air defense systems are too much for the Israelis to overcome without significant losses. The thought of an American invasion of Iran, given the troubles we've had in the two neighboring countries of Afghanistan and Iraq, have to be very, very slim. It leaves us really only with one option, and that is an agreement with Iran, a nuclear deal to slow, if not end, the program. So what did the Iran nuclear deal look like? 6 major powers joined together, the US, the UK, Germany, and France, along with Russia and China. They confronted at the diplomatic table the Islamic Republic. The end result is called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, an agreement by which Iran would give up much of its nuclear capabilities in exchange for the end of sanctions. As the negotiations got underway, the 7 powers staked out their position. Desiring a very weak accord, not surprisingly, was Iran. France could be found at the other end of the spectrum. Among the 6 major powers, it sought the strongest possible deal, hemming in the Iranians. Russia and China would be placed there, with the final 3 Western powers, including the United States, somewhere between China and France. When the negotiations proved fruitful, a deal was struck. I would place the deal roughly there on the scale. Not quite everything the Americans wanted, but clearly closer to our end of the spectrum than the Iranian one. The deal that was struck was a limited trade-off between Iran and the Western world. It would forego its nuclear facilities, allowing international atomic energy inspections of all of its program. In exchange for that, Western sanctions would be relieved and investment in trade would be allowed. The focus of this joint comprehensive agreement was solely the nuclear weapons program of Iran. It did not address the myriad of challenges that remain on the agenda, from Iran's support of international terrorism to its position on Israel, its influence in Syria and Lebanon, the ongoing war in Yemen, among many other issues of concern. It was generally understood that the only way that Iran would come to the negotiating table is if it felt maximum pressure from all major economies. Before negotiations, the U.S. led Western powers in sanctioning Iran, but China and Russia still invested there. Trade was vibrant between them. A deal was struck among the major powers. If everyone sits down at the table, China and Russia agree to divest from Iran, to join the sanctions regime. Yet once the negotiations were complete and a deal was struck, all sanctions would be lifted against the Iranians, allowing not only Russia and China to invest, but France, the UK, and Germany as well. When the deal was struck, the United States moved a little closer towards normal trade relations. However, it was only because we were lifting our sanctions. When Mr. Trump was elected in 2016, he quickly took the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, placing us back on the sanctions end of the spectrum. This is where we stand today. It's a policy similar to the one that we pursue with Cuba, in which the U.S. and U.S. alone is sanctioning the targeted country. Even our allies are trading and investing in Iran today. The great powers, in other words, will trade with Iran, with or without the U.S. on board. This greatly reduces our leverage should we return to the table and seeking a new agreement. And finally, explaining the rise of Iranian power since 2000 is the splintered opposition around it. This is a country that really should be boxed in forever. You've got Turkey and the United States as NATO allies, Israel and Arab states hostile to Iran, Afghanistan under the Taliban, China and Russia, which do not want to see further nuclear weapons spread, including to the Islamic Republic. And yet all of these countries have weakened their own position. Israel and Turkey have been in an ugly spitting match for the last decade. The Arab alliance is in name only. There is no such thing. Even the Gulf Cooperation Council spends more time battling itself than it does the Iranians. Afghanistan is a complete disaster. China and Russia have prioritized trade and investment over nuclear weapons negotiations, leaving the United States isolated. We, of course, change our mind on most every foreign policy issue with each new U.S. president, which means we cannot pursue a consistent policy towards Iran. Iran has become more deeply involved in the war in Ukraine, providing the Russians with drone capability to strike both military and civilian assets in that country. If we find convincing evidence that Iranian drones are being used by the Russians, the United States must respond to this with exceedingly painful actions that will sound the alarm bell in Tehran that there will be a very high price to pay if it supports Russia in its illegal ongoing war in Ukraine. China has taken things one step further, signing a 25-year strategic partnership with Iran covering areas like trade, security, politics, and culture. It reflects Iran's new Eastern-looking policy to counter American max pressure. And of course, for China, there's that Iranian oil and natural gas that it desperately needs for its economy. There is talk today about a possible Shia Spring, one that parallels the Arab Spring that began in December of 2010, when conflict in tiny Tunisia quickly spread throughout the Arab world. Governments in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen all were tumbled by popular protest, and in Syria a civil war started that is now entering its second decade. The shock of the Arab Spring did wear off, to the point that by the time we get to 2020, there's very little discussion about it. But now the talk is about a new Shia Spring in Shia-dominated countries like Iraq, Lebanon, and in today's case study, Iran. It all began in Iran when a young woman was killed during a protest by the Iranian security forces. Massive protests across the nation ensued, making headlines across the globe. Is Iran really at a crossroad today, or are we simply being overly optimistic? If it were at a crossroad and things broke our way, it would mean regime change, another revolution, and maybe even pointing Iran in the direction of moderation. We've been shocked when countries change course dramatically very quickly. South Africa did so in the 1990s. From white minority rule to democracy and an end to the nuclear weapons program. Many hope the same will happen in Iran someday. The odds, however, are with the status quo. The strength of the Iranian regime and its Republican Guard mean the odds of the moderates taking power are relatively slim. It does mean, however, that Iran is likely to continue to crack down and increase the power of the government. Iran today is authoritarian, which means it controls government and all powerful institutions. It is transitioning, however, to totalitarianism. This is when a government controls all aspects of its citizens' lives. Everything that is done is controlled by the government. And profoundly, of course, anti-Western, anti-Israel, and anti-the United States. If Iran is at a crossroads, these are the two directions that it could take. Why I don't think it's likely that a revolution would succeed in the country is reflected in the difference between 1979 and the current situation. Back then, a very weak and declining Shah of Iran faced a very strong popular movement. Today in Iran, however, the regime is quite capable and the popular movement is modest at best. This is an indication that radical change is likely not underway in Iran in 2023. Foreign policy options. We'll take a look at Iran from the perspective of the four foreign policy approaches I've outlined in this course. Wilsonian international liberalism says we should stay engaged with Iran, seek a deal to curb its military capabilities, especially along nuclear lines, and encourage protesters to stand up for their rights and demand government change. A more conservative realpolitik approach would support the anti-Iranian coalition around the country, building up Saudi Arabia, finding opportunities if they exist in Iraq, and strengthening the anti-Tehran coalition. The neoconservatives call for military intervention. This is a classic example for them of a country that needs its government toppled so that the people can express their willingness to be free and democratic, changing the direction of the country. Similar to our invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq, we would not only invade and topple, but fix the country for the future. America Firsters embrace Israel. They talk more strongly about protecting it from threats such as Iran and focus on energy independence as a way of weakening Iran's influence in global oil markets. Four perspectives and four very different foreign policy prescriptions. Thank you.
If I am asked to give advice to the government of Iran about their foreign policy, I would make the following observations. I would say, first of all, that our policy of supporting organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah is working out very well. They're dying. Our soldiers are not. We are aggravating Israel even before the Hamas invasion. We're aggravating Israel. And we are strengthening our support for those countries. Number two, I would suggest to the leadership of Iran that they can't trust the United States. And I would offer the following observation. George Bush called Iran the axis of evil. Then Barack Obama came in and said, no, really, we can be friends with you. Let's sign the JCPOA. Then Trump came in and said, you're the axis of evil. We're going to throw sanctions on you. Then Biden came in and said, okay, let's try to be friends. So we can't trust the U.S. at all. They can't have a consistent and coherent foreign policy. Why should we trust them at all? Third, given the current situation with the JCPOA, which only has 2 more years to run, we're trading with everybody else except the United States. We are developing our nuclear power, potential for nuclear weapons, and we're within at least 2 years, if not less, of being able to do that. So there's no reason to stop that in particular. We've got a population which is kind of rested, but we got strength and we can put down those protests. So that's not really going to be a particularly important issue. We've already defined the next Ayatollah because he is currently the prime minister of the country. He's going to be promoted when the Ayatollah dies. We are trading nicely with China and Russia, so our cash flow is good. So actually, our foreign policy looks pretty good. If that is true, and it's probably close to true, if that is true, then we have a really important question is what should U.S. foreign policy be toward Iran? If we're concerned about Iran, if we are friends of Israel, and I believe that we are, how do we counter that? Where is the entree for us to have any impact on Iran? Remembering that Iran will do what they perceive to be in their own best national interest, just like us. So with that scenario, what should our policy look like? Floor is open. Remember that raise hand feature, guys. Oh, now, come on. If no one says anything, I'm going to call on Rex. Come on, you all know that. You got 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rex, you're on, go.
I don't really know. I don't like the options. I think that we've been put in a very bad place right now with the Biden administration because they're trying to negotiate the deal, but they're not really doing it. And then, they just negotiated a hostage release for $6 billion. Then they want to rescind it, and they're just not helping us.
The $6 billion, my understanding, Rex, is the $6 billion has been held and has not been paid. It's now in a bank in Qatar or something, but it's still being held.
But that just furthers the idea of not trusting us.
Correct. Agreed. Yes, agreed. Rob, does your baby have any opinion on this?
He is also not thrilled with the situation. I'm getting a fair amount of complaints.
Okay.
Yeah, his main view would be thinking about, it seems like we're kind of in a lost situation in that most of the rest of the world has moved on and is treating Iran like a regular player. It seems like Europe is engaging with them.
Absolutely.
And I just don't know if we have the might and the standing anymore to say to everybody, okay, all right, Europe, you're no longer trading. Africa, you guys are no longer trading. South America, listen up, you're no longer trading. And if we don't have that power and authority anymore to wrangle them in, much less Russia and China, I don't know what other options we have other than to engage in a liberal order of, all right, we're going to seek the best deals we can. They're out there. Let's see what we can do and maybe limit them as best we can. But I just don't see our hand that we can play otherwise, unless we're willing to put boots on the ground, which I don't think is a great idea given the other countries that were mentioned. Boots on the ground would be, Iraq, that wasn't exactly a great win. Afghanistan wasn't a great win. So
okay, I appreciate that final comment that the baby gave. That was good. No, Rob hit a couple of important points in terms of, do we have the leadership patina that would allow us to leverage like that? I don't know that we do anymore. The world is becoming multipolar, not unipolar. 1946, it was unipolar. We were in charge, but it's become multipolar now. There are a lot of strong countries, and not all of them have the foreign policy objectives that we do. So it means diplomacy is more important, and we have to recognize that we often need to compromise, not something in our foreign policy history that we've done terribly well. Mr. Rosen, your hand was up and you took it down. You want to go ahead, Rich?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add from a policy point of view, the biggest mistake we made is that we always trusted words that they ever said, that they promised they would do. For instance, the inspections that were supposed to be done many years ago were very limited. And I think we were taken to task that we were very simplistic, simpletons, whatever, in believing everything these guys have to say. They had their own course made out. Their course is like with China, they're not looking at something year to year like we do. They look at things down the road. They've educated their children for these now had for 2 generations to hate certain people, including the United States. And it's going to be very difficult for us to counter what they want to do because now they have China and Russia on their side. And the advantage we have right now is Russia's in a very weak state. So if you're going to do any attacking, which I hope we don't, you don't have to worry about Russia coming to their side, at least not to any great degree. So no, that's my comment.
Okay, Rex?
Well, I guess I'm concerned that their nuclear development continues, and at some point they're going to threaten, if not attack, Israel, and that's a huge challenge for us to sit by and let Israel get annihilated. But it's full-scale war if we have to go after them. And it's potentially a nuclear war if they throw the first nuclear weapon. I'm not sure the conventional weapons are the counter to that.
Let's all be clear that Israel has nuclear weapons. They've had them for decades. No, they've never used them. Under Golda Meir, they were considering using them during the 76 war. I'm sorry, I forget which one it was. They were considering using them, but did not. And to Rex's point, if Iran were to use a nuclear weapon against Israel, Israel would respond, and then we have nuclear war in the Middle East. And Israel would not ask for our opinion, by the way, on that. If that launch took place, they respond, and that would be nuclear war. So we're back into the U.S. policy. So what avenues exist for us to have a dialogue with Iran? Or in fact, is there not a possibility right now, even sub rosa, even, behind the curtain and nobody knows, and we just, have some clandestine stuff? Is there any path that appeals to us in terms of offering something positive with Iran? Go ahead, Pat.
I don't know that there really is. We also have to factor in what's happening right now, which this discussion wouldn't be the same without thinking about what's happening in Israel right now and Gaza.
Right.
I think with Iran, the people are educated there. And as for getting bad stuff, they also get good stuff. They know what the United States is. I mean, the Revolutionary Guards are the ones that get the money. The money is not filtered down to the people. It really isn't. And they have ruined a lot of the businesses in Iran because they couldn't trade with anybody. So that many of the businesses are not doing very well. But the fact that the people are poor, and they are, I think any kind of change will be from inside Iran. And it will probably be with sometimes the guard or the soldiers decide to change the country. I just don't think there's too much power there, and the money's in the hands of the wrong people.
Before we go to Bill and Janie, remember that for a revolution to be successful inside of a country, the tipping point is when the military says we're not going to back the current people. We are going to defend the average population, or the current leader is just too dangerous and we have to get rid of him. So the military turns. In Iran, the military is making a lot of money because of the way the economy works. Mm-hmm. They're in a privileged position, much like the military in North Korea. So they are not incented to challenge the leadership of the current government, because they are benefiting from the situation they have. So the popular protest, though they flare up, and they flared up when this article was written, really don't have any power or strength, and they fizzle out. Ultimately, nations choose the governments they get. That, by the way, includes the United States. And, the government that we get. And if we don't like it, then it's up to we citizens to affect change. More difficult in an authoritarian situation than in a representative government like we have. Bill and Janie, go ahead.
Yeah, I first of all, I like this article. I thought it was written better than most of the articles that we've had recently. And I kind of agree with him. I don't think that America can change the regime, even if the women of Iran are protesting. But I think that if we come back in the back door, and there are things that we could agree with Iran. We could trade some things with them. There are some things that would work out. So maybe we need to build trust that way, slowly. And then maybe then we could work on nuclear power. I don't think we can jump in now.
I don't think we can either, Janie. And there are opportunities for us to trade with Iran if we reduce sanctions, not just to throw billions of dollars at them. That's not trade, but there actually are trade opportunities. All indications are that the Iranian middle class, which is fairly well off economically, would love U.S. consumer goods and products, which we produce. So that certainly is there. Iran produces a fair amount of oil, and given our administration's disinclination towards supporting petroleum production or increased production, having other petroleum flow into the world that perhaps we buy keeps the prices down and protects the land that our current administration is trying to protect. There is some potential there if we can actually sit down and have a real conversation. Don't know if we can, but the potential is certainly there. Rob?
I mean, one thing I've been thinking about is what is the main export of Iran? I believe it's still oils.
It is, Rob. Yep.
And is there any, I mean, I know this is still pie in the sky a ways off, but as we make our green transition, will that limit their income flow? And maybe, by us being off oil as quickly as possible, will start to destabilize them if there's just less demand. Because
under the most optimistic scenario, Rob, what you're talking about is decades away. Under the most optimistic scenario. So given Iran's current attitude, there's going to be a boiling point way before we get to that turning point, I'm afraid. If we were right on the edge, maybe, but that's not going to happen. Petroleum is still going to be important for a few decades worldwide, and Iran has an advantage with their oil production. They just do. We're looking for U.S. foreign policy options, entrees, things we can do to improve the relationship with Iran. We're going to touch on Israel in a few minutes specifically. Got a question I want to toss out at you, but for the moment, we're talking about trying to improve our relationship, if we can, with Iran. Maybe we can't, I don't know, but that's up to you. Go, Rex.
Well, I think that one problem that we have is that there isn't time for us to really develop that relationship. I mean, we could try to say that, okay, we want to, sell you some goods or something like that, and or buy some oil from you. But China's locked up the oil, I think, for at least the short term. And so I don't think that's available to us. And as you say, they don't trust us. And the problem is that I think the situation between Iran and Israel is going to come to a head within the next couple of years. And if it does that necessitate regime change in Iran? Because Israel is going to try to wipe out the leadership of Iran.
Iran or Hamas? I'm sorry.
Iran.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if Iran attacks Israel,
Oh, yes.
Israel will go at them all guns blazing to wipe out the leadership.
If Iran attacks Israel, we have nuclear war, Rex.
Well, and Iran's not going to come out of that well.
Well, the world isn't going to come out of that well.
That too, but we're focused on Iran.
I understand that. I just thought I'd toss out the world reference. That's all, just to be fair, but no, I agree with you. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, Rex just pointed the real challenge at this moment, because Iran has said that if the ground forces are moving, IDF is moving into Gaza, that no bars withheld is what Iran is already indicating. They're going around and making deals with the various Arab countries. Hezbollah already with several hundred thousands of missiles or rockets. This is not a pretty picture. Russia is even showing inclination of encouraging Hamas. China doesn't want Iran to get into a war because they're getting the oil from Iran. But these complexities cannot be avoided unless significant amount of Arab countries stand up and say to Iran, back off, don't continue supporting terrorist organizations. We don't want you to be involved in the Hamas-Israel situation. I'm not seeing that leadership from either Saudis or anybody else. So whoever starts the first bomb will become the villain. And that's where the game is at this point. This is, if we can keep the temperature lower by either a paused start-stop technique in the Gaza confrontation, and very clearly demonstrate, Israel has to demonstrate, unfortunately, that they're not going after indiscriminately with the civilians and things like that. Well, the touchy point is the hostages are there too, so that's why they have to do the start-stop. That could extend the time frame IDF has to punish some Hamas, maybe retrieve some hostages, etc. The ultimate change, like somebody else referred to, is the people themselves have to decide. And in this case, the Gaza Palestinians have to decide, and world referendum or powers have to give them an opportunity for formation of political parties that do not have destruction of Israel as a core, things like that. Now, you can't say that to Iran. That's the biggest problem, because the Khomeini and all those guys are just too hell-bent on this thing. I'm sorry.
Say something else.
Yeah, and so the Iranian people have to jump up now, but that's not happening. Bombardment of information. I don't know what their internet situation is and things like that, but that might help the revolution, the Shia revolution, so to speak.
Next time I need a dose of optimism, I'm going to call on Ben right away, and it'll just like short circuit the entire conversation. And we can go on. We can go on from there.
Oh, yeah.
Iran's statement about their involvement based upon Israel's behavior, I currently liken to Vladimir Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which he's not going to do because everyone knows where he lives and he will be attacked with counter nuclear weapons. So I'm on record as saying he's not going to do that. Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon and they will develop one and they will say, we've got it. That's true. But it's the same situation. Using it means it'll be used back at you, and Israel's nuclear arms, so that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to have a positive result. What we're lacking is the incentive to offer to Iran, if you go in a peaceful direction, bear with me, in a peaceful direction, we can help you with doing A, B, and C. I don't know if that's a credible offer for us at the moment. I don't know if we're capable of it. I don't know that we are. Rich, go ahead.
First of all, dealing with Iran is like us dealing with North Korea. It's just not going to be workable. They don't like us. They never will. They see us as an enemy because we backed Israel to a great extent. What I thought was a great idea and is one that I think they have to start again if they can, is that the idea of the Sunni versus the Shia, where there's not a lot of love between those two groups, or at least they hadn't been historically. The Abraham Accord, I thought, was an excellent idea, even though some people may not agree. But it was a way in which we were to get Saudi Arabia. Now we have the UAE and a few other people on our side. And I think that's what we have to do. It is we just have to work around them and rebuild our old alliances and as best as we can. And sometimes it's based on realizing that the Shia-Sunni relationship, which seems to be improving, and I think that's where we went to an error. We should have continued to make sure we created schisms between those two.
I agree with Rich and believe that after a few more years, there will be a greater appreciation of the positive movement based upon the Abraham Accords. Many folks in this country dislike that agreement because of who brokered it. And you have to sometimes disassociate yourself from whose idea was it to what did it achieve. One of the things it achieved was moving Saudi Arabia and Israel closer together. That is ultimately a good thing, because if a peaceful situation in the Middle East is based upon balance, of course, there hasn't been peace in the Middle East for 4,000 years, but if there's going to be peace in the Middle East, it's going to be based on balance. And balance, the combination of Israel and Saudi Arabia to some degree provides a wonderful balance against Iran and their intentions. I'm not saying there needs to be war. I'm just saying that stability tends to come from balance. That would provide that. So, Rich, I'm optimistic in a few years that there will be a greater appreciation of the Abraham Accords. At the moment, it's tied up with, well, look who negotiated it. What we need to look at is what the result is. And I think it's going to be more positive than people give it credit for. Rex, go ahead.
Well, you had mentioned Iran's statement about their role in this, but I think both the New York Times and the Washington Post indicated that they had evidence that Iran was involved in egging on the Hamas and also Hezbollah.
Wall Street Journal too, Rex. Wall Street Journal too. Yeah.
Sorry,
all three.
But the thing that was about to happen, as I understand, was some further relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia, And the timing of this may well be of the Hamas attack was to stop that from happening, because I don't know if it was full recognition of each other or something to that extent. But I mean, Saudi Arabia is now pulled back, and obviously Israel's not in a position to do anything on that international negotiation level at this point in their battle. But I think that's, as you said, the Abraham Accords were leading to something good. That was even another step closer for Saudi Arabia and Israel, and might have really opened the door to much more positive balance in the area.
Well,
Correct. Go ahead, Pat.
you gotta remember, there was just a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia with the Houthis. Remember, in Yemen.
A proxy war in Yemen, yes.
Yeah, it
Proxy
wasn't
war.
too long ago. I mean, so you're always going to have Iran and you're always going to have the Shia and the Sunnis fighting. It's probably Iran egged on Hamas, even though they probably don't like Hamas. They egged them on to do something here, to disturb that whole thing that was going on with the Abraham Accord. But I mean, you can't ever see Saudi Arabia and Iran being great friends or whatever, maybe tolerate each other, but it's gonna be, I don't know. It's hard.
It'd be very difficult to posit a situation where Saudi Arabia and Iran would ever be even remotely friendly with each other.
Right.
Separate from the Shia and Sunni divide, there's also the divide between Persians and Arabs. They speak
Right.
different languages.
Right.
They both want to be the major power broker in the Middle East. There isn't enough room for both of them. Them having a rapprochement seems almost in the foreseeable future impossible. The Saudi Arabia-Israel connection, even though Saudi Arabia put it on hold, is much more likely to flourish and go forward, which causes Iran distress. But think about Hamas for just a minute, and then Rich will get to you, and then Bill and Cheney. Think about Hamas for just a minute. If they stop and think, which I'm not sure they're doing, but if they stop and think, they will realize that they are being used as cannon fodder by Iran to have impact on Saudi Arabia. And if they think through it, it is, wait a minute, what are we getting out of this? Wait a minute. How are we improving where we are? Or to the extent we care about the people of Gaza, they are being used, much like the Houthi rebels were being used in Yemen. And maybe at some point they will understand that. I don't know if they will. We've got Rich up next, Bill and Jamie to follow, and Susan Kramer will be third. Rich, go.
Yeah, the first thing was, and I thought that this war that started with Gaza was because of our trying to get closer to the Saudis, which may be somewhat true. But I've got a very good friend who fought both in the 67 and 73 wars in Israel, and he's a joint Israeli-U.S. citizen. And he made an interesting comment to me. He said that the reason he thought that this was started was this was planned well in advance to commemorate the beginning of the 1973 war to the day by 50 years. So if you look when the 73 war started, 50 years to the day is when this little war started.
Correct.
As far as fodder, when you're educated at the age of 3 to 10 to hate and realize that if you do good for the hate that you have with all the virgins and stuff like that, you don't see about that. You see what they teach you, which is the bigger mission, the more heavenly mission of what you're supposed to do, which is very evil. But this is all part of the educational training that started 40 years ago. You see it in Palestine. I mean, those kids for so many years under Arafat at school were learning about how to hate Israel and how bad and terrible they were. So I think that's the other problem. And then finally, regarding the Abraham emissions, accord, which I agree with you totally, and I think I said it originally, was a wonderful idea. The terrible idea is that the current administration has basically dished the Saudi Arabian country. They've done so by trying to change, going into the Saudi Arabia and dissing the way that their lives are. They're trying to westernize them to some degree. And I think the Saudis took offense at that. This bit about the hand pumps and the idea that our news media for years were talking about the gentleman that was killed in Turkey and blaming it on,
Khashoggi.
yeah, and blaming it on the current administration in Saudi, which may be true, but just hammering it. And these are our friends, and we never treat them as friends. We're trying to change our friends, which in the long run is going to be detrimental to us. Thank you.
Yeah. Mixed message would be an understatement in that scenario you just described. Bill and Janie, go ahead.
I was just gonna bring up another point. First of all, we weren't always enemies with Iran. We were friendly with when the Shah was there, but Iran are Persians, and they think they're better than the rest of the Arab nations. They're not Arabs. They will tell you they are not Arabs. They're Persians. And that's another factor, I think, that affects the relationships with other nations in that area. And maybe we could use that to help make a friend or a little bit better.
Janie brings up an interesting point. We certainly had better relations with Iran when the Shah or his father were in power. But understand, as difficult as this is to hear, they were dictators controlled by us. They were our dictators. They did what we wanted. They ruled their country, agreed, but they did what we wanted. When the Iranian people deposed the Shah, the second Shah, and put in elected in a fair election, a new prime minister, Mossadegh, we, which would be the United States and Great Britain, engineered a coup to get rid of him and put back into power the Shah, our guy, our dictator. That leaves kind of a bad taste in their mouth. So yes, our relationships were better because we were propping them up. We've done that in other places. We did it with Syngman Rhee in South Korea. That was our guy and our dictator, and he did very well. We did it with countries in South America and Africa. That was the Dulles brothers, essentially. And that's not the way to win friends and influence people long term. Yeah, we get a person in power, but when the Iranians go, you know what, Shah, we're really tired of you, and he goes, which he did in 79, then we lose any leverage with that country at all. Yes, it was good under the Shah. By the way, the Shah, in terms of treatment of women and in terms of education and some other things in the country, was really very good. But ultimately, he was our dictator who did what we wanted until cancer took him down and the Ayatollah came back from France. So it was better, but the people of Iran certainly weren't in charge of their own destiny. Susan Kramer, go.
I have sort of a ridiculous question, I guess. Given our response after 9/11 and that we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, in retaliation, and I can't imagine the Israelis under any circumstances not going in. I mean, if it was up to me, if they blew up the entire all of Gaza, I wouldn't mind. But I'm wondering if there could be anything to be gained by them not going in and retaliating the way they are planning to. Is this, I know it's a ridiculous idea because I can't imagine Netanyahu taking any other direction. But
Okay.
But
As
I
I'm,
don't know, what does anybody think? Is it, if there were, if the Israelis said,
What can they do?
I mean, what could they possibly do? Maybe to work out a deal if they didn't,
Kidnap people.
if they didn't go in and destroy everything. I mean, because they really do have to take out Hamas, but I don't know if that's really possible.
okay. Israel will defend itself, will attack Hamas, and will neutralize them to the best of their ability. It is self-defense. It is reasonable. In my most recent newsletter, which a number of you received, I drew a very careful parallel between how the U.S. responded after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and how Israel responded or is responding after the attack from Hamas. There's an amazing number of parallels. Nations are allowed to defend themselves. And at the moment, that's what Israel is doing. So it may be a lot of carnage, yes, but they also have a right to defend themselves, just like we did in December of 1941.
That's right.
Tough to watch, but reasonable and appropriate. Nations have the right of self-defense. Even the United Nations rules acknowledge that self-defense of a nation is an appropriate military activity.
Yeah, I'm not questioning if there's any, that's absolutely true. But it's so distressing right now because the rest of the world seems to not view it that way.
There are many people in many nations who are saying that there needs to be an immediate ceasefire, cessation of military activities. I disagree with that, which is why I wrote about that in my newsletter and said, no, I don't believe that that is credible. I'm going to let Ben slip in because, as we already know from a few minutes ago, he's the voice of optimism. And when he finishes, then I want to pose another question for you that I think you guys need to think through. Ben, go ahead. Unmute, Ben.
Sorry about that. If all these nations want cessation, then they need to step up on multi levels. One, bring in humanitarian aid and corridor and do all that. Number two, create an environment where the Palestinians are able to organize and form political views and parties or whatever, because the West Bank seems like it's going on its own. So this is Gaza by itself. And also some teaching of people, because ultimately it is culture and beliefs and value systems that we believe in that somebody was talking about 40 years teaching, kill the Jewish people, things like that. So those type of things need to be addressed. And I've always believed that Reformation in Christianity really only improved it. Islam has not really seen that level of Reformation, but that's on the religious side.
Okay, hold right there, buddy, because I've made that point to many other groups. Christianity went through a Reformation. It was helpful. The Islamic faith has not, and they still have those basic disagreements from 746 AD. Come on. That's like 2,000 years. Come on.
But Reformation is not a one-time event. It goes on every Sunday. Every Sunday.
At least it started.
Yes, it needs to be within each of those groups, Shia and Sunni, and all the subgroups that they have, based on culture, nationality, ethnicity, and all that. They all have different viewpoints. I agree. But that type of soul searching also has to happen. And when that doesn't happen and you give abject loyalty to only the religious leaders of your group without even questioning, then who,
I
know,
think they're
how could you
doing-
expect anything better? So bottom line, I guess, is that there's a lot of things that need to be done. And that is the only way that, with the understanding that live and let live and the two-state solution situation, whatever it is, the world has to be involved in it. At this point, Israel is handling it all by itself in terms of going in and like you said, they're defending themselves, which is correct. But the diminution of the Hamas's ability, the tunnels and the weaponry, that needs to happen, because if it is being used for attacking purposes, then this is not the right approach. This is not going to be the right answer. And I concur with you, Gary. Iran is just a barking dog. He's using Hamas people and Hezbollah people and the Houthis to do all the dirty work while they stay comfortably in their little corner of the world. So they can, the money's flowing, but that's the only thing that's happening. You have to solve it one bite at a time. That's it.
1 year from today, 2024, October, we will be in chapter 7 of the 2024 book. We'll be discussing Indonesia, which has the largest Muslim population in the world,
100 million.
and it's peaceful. It'll be interesting when we get there a year from now to contrast why that country is different than what we are seeing in the Middle East. And that's, you may not even remember I said this, but we're going to get there in a year and we will see how the conversation goes. Now, it's 7:45. I want to toss out a very different and relevant question since we are all in the United States. The United States has moved significant naval assets to the eastern end of the Mediterranean. We have 2 carrier task forces there. That means we have, in round numbers, 80 fighter jets within a few minutes of Israel. They're sitting there. We also have about 2,000 Marines or so with those naval task forces. If Israel were to ask for direct U.S. military assistance, which would probably be in the form of fighter planes along the northern border against Hezbollah, based on my study, most probably, does the U.S. take the step of committing our military to assist Israel, or do we say, that's a step too far, we will give you dollars, we'll give you ammunition, we'll give you equipment, but we're not going to take this step too far? Now, before I answer, remember that our track record of committing boots on the ground, let's review Iraq, let's review Afghanistan, we don't have a great track record of doing that, but the possibility is there right now. If Israel has to fight a 3-front war, that's going to really stretch their military. If they say to the U.S., we want your active personnel help, what do you want our president to do? Open question. It may come up. You should be prepared for it. So let's think through it for just a bit. If that request is made, how should the U.S. respond? Go, Pat.
I've already thought about this.
Yeah, so have I.
I think that it would just be in response to Hezbollah. And I don't think that we would do anything, and I would hope that Biden wouldn't. But I'm very curious as to who shot the rocket into Gaza that just hit the hospital. Of course, we may not know, but if it was Israel, that's pretty bad.
I was reading multiple sources on that before this meeting started, Pat. And what I read, and as you guys can probably understand, I read a whole lot of different news sources on a regular basis, is that it is possible that that was a Hamas rocket which misfired and slammed into its own territory. Now, we don't know. At the moment, there is not confirmed evidence either way, but that could be the case also, which puts a whole different spin on it. So
I think
let's
that
put that
Biden
to
has
the
been
side.
going over it. Biden has been going over and talking to Netanyahu and says, cool, pull it back a little bit, pull it back. You know, be
Perhaps,
more careful.
But I want to, Pat, I want to redirect, Pat, I want to redirect just a bit to the scenario that I posted. And you answered my question, that a scenario that I posted in terms of Israel asked for our help in terms of troops or fighter planes. What do you want the United States to do? Because it may happen.
I
So
say
go
no.
ahead, guys. Bill, go ahead, and then we'll go to Rex. Bill, go ahead.
I would think that the troops and the planes are there as a deterrent if Iran goes in. I would think that the United States should not use military might unless Israel's survival, at least in the northern part of the country, is jeopardized. And so far, what I've heard or read is that Israel says it can handle a two-front war, just between, you know, if Hezbollah, you know, continues to fire rockets. But I don't think that we should rush to go in, because 2,000 Marines aren't going to do anything, you know, in terms of an invasion. And air power is just a deterrent to hold back an invasion. So I don't think we're going to be at that point. So far, hopefully we won't be there, because the threat to Israel won't be that catastrophic.
I fully agree with you that I hope we don't get there, but what I'm trying to have this audience do is think about it, because one of the values of these discussions is, wow, what if that situation pops up? We talked about it. Now I've thought about it in advance, because from where I sit, this is a very real possibility, and we need to be prepared. Do we support the president? Do we disagree with whatever we do? We just need to be prepared for it. Rex, go.
Well, as you stated it, it's if we were asked by Israel to come in, and obviously then it's beyond their control, or they don't think that they are going to do well under a multi-front war. So I think that it does make sense that we go in, and I think 2,000 troops on the ground would have a huge impact. I don't know what support in terms of tanks and other implements of destruction would go along with the Marines at that point in time. But I think that would be a huge deterrent to any Hezbollah invasion, and the air power would certainly be a deterrent to their missiles and all of that, because you can take out missile sites and whatever. So I don't know what's going to happen, but you know, it would be portrayed in the press as us being bullies and all of that kind of thing, and any of the friendly fire that caused some casualties would be brought up probably at the UN as, you know, terrible things that we've done. But I think that it's justified, and it's different than Iraq and Iran, or Iraq and Afghanistan, because we're fighting with an active military power. We're not trying to come in place of a military power.
The 2,000 Marines are essentially are essentially a division of ground troops. They don't have tank support or that sort of stuff. In the carrier group, they don't. We would have much more impact if we were to use it with our fighter planes attacking Hezbollah along the border on the north. That would be very, very powerful on our part. But you're correct, 2,000 Marines, even without tanks, because they don't have them, would certainly change the calculus locally if that were to take place. Rob, go.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if we have any military bases in Israel.
We do not, we do not.
So I think to avoid the bad press that Rex was mentioning, if there were any possibility to do a very, very quick land swap for a base, us having a base and having 2,000 people stationed at that base may help provide, more cover and prevent us from getting to the, all right, now we actually need boots on the ground to help hold our northern front. I'm just trying to think of, Okinawa. It's like, well, we still have a base there, and that provides us an excuse for keeping an active military presence there, and it does have its own deterrent aspect to it. I don't know what the status is, or if there'd even be, I don't know, however many acres you need to donate for a base, but if that were to happen, I think we'd be a little bit more solid territory than just saying, all right, we're going in.
We don't need to establish a base. One of the interesting things about Israel's defense posture is that they have a number of bases which essentially sit there empty until reserves are called up. Israel's called up 300,000 reserves so far, but there still are additional reserve bases, and all we would need to do is take those 2,000 troops, put them on one of the reserve bases, they're there. So that is not an issue. I mean, it's an issue in terms of should we, shouldn't we? But in terms of getting in there, Rob, no, that's literally instantaneous if we think it's a good idea. Okay, so we're still examining the issue of if we, the United States, get the request from Israel to commit boots on the ground and or fighter planes in the air, how do we respond? And we've had 5 folks comment on that. It's important that we all think through this because it may occur, as uncomfortable as it may sound. We need to think through it because the possibility is there. Any other comments or responses on this very specific point? Richard, go.
Okay, I have a question.
Go.
If we
I'm sorry, I muted you by mistake. I'm sorry, Rich. I'm sorry, it's my fault. I hit the wrong button.
Okay. Yeah, just a question to you, Gary. If we go in and do some kind of military action using our planes and our ships and stuff like that,
right?
How does that weaken our situation with Taiwan?
It doesn't. It actually strengthens it.
Okay.
Because it shows that we're willing to commit forces on behalf of an ally. And from any perspective that I can define, Taiwan is our ally. Even if we don't have written defense agreements with them, they are an ally. So it sends a very clear message that says, in the event of something really severe, not that Ukraine isn't severe, put that to the side, we will respond. That sends a huge message, Rich. Please be aware, guys, that we're talking about war scenarios. This conversation is talking about escalation, who supports who, what does the other nation do? This is a very serious situation which is going on. And we're not close to resolution yet, I'm afraid. It's 7:57. We got time for probably 2 more comments. Bill and Janie took the first one. Go, guys. Unmute, Bill. Oh, have Janie show you, Bill. Come on. It's that unmute button in the corner in the bottom, Bill. Come on.
Sorry.
There you go.
I'm technical. One thing we haven't discussed is what about the civilian propaganda? Like right now, after the bombing of the hospital, there's all kinds of protests in, I guess, Iran and in Libya, in Lisbon, that we are not discussing. I wonder how that affects the whole thing and affects how we go in based on how the rest of the world looks at us. So far, they're sympathizing with Israel and they're saying anything we do is fine, but that could change.
There's no such thing as an antiseptic war. There will be civilian casualties. People, innocent people in the Gaza Strip will be killed. You can't have an antiseptic war. That concept of a surgical strike is a oxymoron. There is no such thing. So if Israel defends itself, which it is in the process of doing, there will be civilian casualties. It may be abhorrent to you. It may violate your sense of moral balance, but it will happen. I'm sorry, that's what happens in war.
No, no,
We got
that's
time
not
for
what,
one
that's
more.
not what I'm referring to.
I'm sorry, Bill.
What happens, like right now, I believe that Israel would like to take a different tact and not go into the Gaza Strip because, and that's what they're doing. They're waiting for Biden to come over and think about other ways to handle this. But if they're forced into something because of how the other civilians in the rest of the world look at them, how does that affect everything? Not that they should worry about attacking Gaza, but how does public opinion affect the whole thing?
One of the mantras within Israel is a variation of never again. Some of you who have deep Jewish heritage will recognize the phrase. Never again connects back to World War II and the Holocaust. And phrase never again is we will not allow ourselves, Israel speaking, to be put in that sort of situation again. We will defend ourselves and we will do it forcefully. That's where they are, Bill. So maybe there's going to be collateral damage, maybe there is, but it is, we will not risk our existence. So I believe that that's at play. Alan, go ahead, and then we'll go to Rex, and then I'm going to do a wrap up because we're 8 o'clock. We're going to go on for a couple of minutes. If you guys have to leave, we understand, but it's Alan next, and then Rex. Go, Alan.
Really short. I mean, if we do not come to the aid of Israel, if they request it, that means that they're in trouble. And if we do not come to their aid, then we're just a paper tiger, and everybody else will just walk over us. They won't believe us as far as Taiwan. They won't believe us about anything. And then you will have lost Saudi Arabia. You will have lost all the Arab countries that we're trying to get on our side.
I tend to agree with you, Alan. Rex.
And I think picking up on what Bill was saying, I think that there will be pressure on the Biden administration if in fact it's still inconclusive as to whether Israel or Hamas hit this hospital. People are going to be saying that the US should talk Israel down. And if we join the fray for a Hezbollah front on this thing, we'll get some flack for that. But I don't think that changes what we do. Certainly won't change what Israel's going to do.
One of the issues of leadership, guys, is that you get flack. There will always be people that disagree with you. So the question becomes, are you doing what you believe is right, consistent with your values? Personally, if Israel asks for our help, we damn well better go in. But that's just me personally. I'm trying to moderate a balanced discussion, but that's just me personally worthy to ask. Let's transition to next month, which is our final meeting of the year. We do Chapter 8, Climate Change, Environmental Degradation, and Migration. Climate change is occurring by every possible measurement that I've seen. It is occurring faster than has happened before. The causes of it, we can debate, but climate change is happening. Because it's happening, certain populations, particularly in Africa, are going to be faced with situations where they can't live where they currently live. Where are they going to go? That's what we'll try to discuss in that chapter. Secondly, depending upon the amount of time we have next month, when we do Chapter 8, I like to ask the question of my groups. And the question is, what is your principal takeaway from great decisions this year? You will have at that point worked through 8 meetings with us together, starting way back in February. And I'm interested in what your major takeaway is. What was the thing that you learned? What was the thing that you were surprised by? What one thing was it? It's helpful to me in terms of leading the number of groups that I do. And it's also helpful to you to learn how the other folks in the Deerfield Library Group perceive the information that we process. Remember, next year's topics are all available. I put them in my newsletter, and they are available at fpa.org, so you can read through them. I already mentioned one of them, which is Indonesia, but you can read about the other 7 topics if you wish. Jamie, we are at the end of this. Thank you, everyone. And Rob, I still may do that baby lullaby thing next month, because I just think it might be cute. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next month.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay.
Thanks.
All righty. Bye.
Bye.